I was born here in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, in uh, in 1925, and I have one sister and three brothers, and we lived on my dad's original allotment here in Sapulpa, near where Circle Drive now is. And my father was Maxie Wildcat. My mother was Lizzie Bighead Wildcat. And they were fluent speakers, and only Yuchi was spoken in our home. So therefore, as a child, that's all I heard, Yuchi. And when we children began to go to school, my sister, which is the oldest, and a brother older than I am, we went to Forest Park School here in Sapulpa, which is now the Sapulpa Indian Clinic. We went to Forest Park. We were within walking distance of that from where my dad's allotment was. And so the Yuchi language was well spoken, and we were members of the Pickett Chapel United Methodist Church, and that language was spoken there. The Yuchi language was spoken there by many of the adults, and the children could understand it, but I don't know how well many of them spoke. All I can remember is that we were at church every Sunday. Sometimes we went Friday nights, and we camped there. So families were always together. And the Yuchi language was spoken. But we sang a lot of Creek Muskogee songs. And those songs, to me, and the Yuchi songs, are just a great blessing to me. I don't know why it is, but when I hear the native songs and I sing the native songs, the spirit is just so different. And I love the English songs. They're beautiful. But they do not do for me spiritually what our native songs. And so we belong to the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. We have many different tribes that come to and we try to learn one another's songs. And when we all get together, we sing those songs, and it's just wonderful, beautiful. You just come home feeling so refreshed, so full. And that's the way it is when I taught my children. My children do not speak the language because they're not full-bloods like I am, because the father is half Creek. And my son, I have one son, my youngest son, he took the Creek language when he was going to high school, junior college. So he's pretty fluent in Creek. So he he said, I have more opportunities to talk Creek than I would Yuchi, because so few people talk Yuchi now. So he understands Creek, and he can sing the Creek songs. And he's a great singer and also a piano player. So he plays he's called on to play for many different meetings and programs that they have. And so, but to me, when I must have been 8 or 9 years old, there was a situation came up in our home, and so my dad took us children, and we went to his grandmother. She lived out at Pickett Chapel, out in the country, which is about 7 miles from here where she lived. So, and there were other people, other family members already living there. And we had an uncle there and an aunt and a small child that were already there with my grandmother. But she took us all in. That's the way the Indian people do, Yuchi people especially. I know this has happened to many. It's even happened in my home. I've raised some grandchildren, and but the language was always spoken. My grandmother, she never spoke English. She's the one that shared this story with us that I'm going to tell today. But that's all we did. That was our entertainment. No, we had no radio, no television, no electricity, no gas. We carried water from a well, and but they grew everything that we had to eat, and we ate 3 meals a day. And the men, my 2 uncles and my dad, they worked the farm, and they had hogs for our meat, but we had a neighbor that had cattle. So when they'd butcher a calf or whatever they were going to butcher, the men, they would come and get our men, and they would go up there and help them. Then they'd bring home some beef. Well, when they butchered hogs, they would come down and help the men. And so they gave them pork. So, you know, we just worked like that. And they gave us milk and butter because they had cattle, you know. And we had our own orchard trees, and we had blackberries and a lot of pecans and just almost anything, you know, that you would want. So we were never hungry. And I don't know. I think my grandmother got some kind of a check. I don't know what. But that was the only money that I know that came in, is she had chickens. And so, you know, and that's how, and on Thursday or Friday, some of us children would have to go to the store. We'd walk about 2 miles, sell her eggs. And that was the money that she took to the church. That was her tithe. And she did that. She was faithful to that. And today I remember that. I think of that. I said, she really was planting seeds there at that time. And I look at myself and I said, I don't give of myself like she did. She really, you know, and she had no education. She had never gone to school, but she knew so much. So the Lord was really in her life, because how did she find these stories? You know, you buy these stories and they say, is it Aesop's the ones, these are tales they call them. But she told us these stories, not even going to school. So how did she know them? How did she know them? But we've heard, she told us a lot of stories. But today I'm telling the one about how the rabbit got its short tail. A long time ago, there were no white people around. There were only Indian people, and there were animals. And all of the Indian people, they could talk one language, and they understood. And the animals were that way. They could understand. They could talk. And so one day, the rabbit was the one that was always, he was always playing tricks on the other animals and on people. And so he was playing around, and all the animals and the people all knew that he was this way. So but he stayed where a rabbit stayed, he stayed in the bush, and he always dug a kind of down, and he fixed a place for him to stay. And so it was getting winter time. It was getting cold, maybe about like it is now. And that's another thing I need to say. My grandmother only told these stories in the wintertime. And I don't know why. I never did ask her. No one ever asked her, because they've asked me, why did she say that? I said, we didn't ask questions when we were small children. We just did what they told us, and not like today. You know, small children are full of questions. We weren't that way. We listened. And so the rabbit decided that he woke up early that morning, and he was hungry. When he woke up, he was hungry. And he got up and he looked around and then he looked toward the creek. And there he stood there, and he thought he saw a form down there. And then pretty soon he saw movement. And so he kept watching. And pretty soon he saw this fox. And the fox was down there. And so pretty soon the fox was moving around, and he had fish. He had fish, you know, a string of fish. And oh, that rabbit was so hungry. And he kept thinking about that. Well, maybe he'll come by this way, and maybe he'll give me some fish, or maybe I'll go home with him or something. But then the rabbit was thinking all the time, so the fox was coming back. He had to go by the path there, by where the rabbit was. So when he was coming by, the rabbit spoke to him. He said, "How did you catch all that fish? There's ice out there. The lake is iced." And the fox said, "I found a rock, and I went out there on the ice, and I broke that ice. And then when I broke the ice, I turned around backwards and went and got up to this where the crushed ice was, and I stuck my tail in there, and I stood in there, and I knew that eventually the fish would probably get on try to nibble that tail." So he stood there a little while, and when he felt the heaviness on his tail, he pulled it out. He pulled that tail out, and he had all that fish. And oh, the rabbit was just getting hungrier and hungrier when he was telling him that. So he couldn't wait for the fox to leave. So the fox took his fish, and he was going on home. And the rabbit, he went on down to the lake, and he found a rock when he went out, but that rock wasn't big enough. He couldn't crack the ice like he wanted. So he went back, and he looked around, and he found a bigger rock. And he went back. He crushed the ice. He turned around, and he done the same thing. Put his tail in there. And so he stayed there, and he waited, and he thought the longer he waited, the more fish he would get. And so when he finally he decided to pull his tail out, it was heavy, and he couldn't pull it out. So he thought, well, I got to rest a little bit. Then I'll just jerk on it real hard. So he waited a few minutes more, and then that's what he did. Or he just took a deep breath, and he just jerked and pulled, but his tail didn't come out. The tail stayed in the water with the ice. So that's why today the rabbit has a short tail.